Hi, I'm Charlie and welcome to Doc Vlog. Now, I hate YouTube shows with long intros explaining what this is, but since this is the first episode of this show, I do kind of have to explain what it is, so I apologize in advance. But basically what this is going to be is an ongoing chronicle of what I'm doing to create the documentary that I'm going to be working on over the next at least 6 to 10 months, which is about the Quad Traverse, our Quad Traverse project. I don't know how often I'll be updating it, but I'm hoping that this will be useful for other people who might be interested in making a low budget sort of single man documentary like this. You can see the mistakes that I make and the things that I'm doing. And I also think it'll be useful for me, both just so I'm getting more practice with the equipment and also so that I'm chronicling what I'm doing. I've got a good record of everything that I'm doing. And it's going to force me to think through why I'm doing the things that I'm doing so that I can explain them to you. So that's the purpose behind this show. Now, to begin with, I want to talk about previous projects and a few lessons that I've learned from previous projects that I really want to apply to the Quad Traverse. So let's talk some lessons. Probably the biggest lesson that I learned from the feature-length documentary film that I made, which was called Living with Dead Hearts. I made that together with my wife. One of the big lessons that we learned is that it's really important to go in with a plan of what you want to shoot. Now, with a documentary, that plan isn't necessarily going to work out. You never know what's going to happen once the cameras start rolling. You don't know exactly how everything's going to play out. But you still want to go in with a plan and try to have the best idea you can of what your story is going to be, what you're going to need to shoot, because otherwise you can end up wasting a lot of time shooting things you don't need, or wasting a lot of time having to go back and do something over again because you didn't get the shot that you needed the first time. So that's one thing that with the Quad Traverse, obviously I don't know how it's going to go. I can't know what's going to happen in our training, and I've already cracked a rib, which is not something I would have anticipated a couple weeks ago when we sort of really started this whole thing up. So you never know what curveballs life is going to throw at you, but at the same time that doesn't mean you can't go in with a plan. So one really important thing for this documentary is what I'm doing to sort of plan for this and have that plan drawn out so that we can come in with a real idea of what needs to get shot and make sure that we don't forget anything. Another big lesson that we learned from Living with Dead Hearts was just that natural light can cause some issues. We shot that whole documentary with natural light because we didn't have any external lights at all. And it made editing really difficult, especially in interviews, because you'd be shooting somebody who's sort of next to a window, kind of like I am now or whatever, and you might be talking to them for an hour or 2 hours or even longer than that, some of these interviews. So during that time, the sun moves, maybe the sun even goes down, the color of the light in the room changes. And so the color of what you're recording changes, and then that makes it very difficult, and it's a lot of color correction work to try to match those shots up so that when you're editing, maybe you want to grab this section from the end of the interview, a different section from the beginning of the interview, but then you've got to really color grade them and push them around, otherwise they're just not going to match because the light was different at different times. So one thing that we definitely are going to be doing with the Quad Traverse is making sure that at least with interviews, everything's going to be shot with as carefully controlled light as we can. That's part of the reason that we did the Kickstarter, was to have some budget so that we can buy some lights. And now as you can see, I don't have lights yet, so this is probably going to be a little bit grainy video because this room isn't that well lit. So I've had to bump the ISO up and stuff on the camera. But once the Kickstarter money actually comes through in a couple weeks, we will buy some lights, we'll have lights, and then the goal is to have all the lighting in the interviews be very, very controlled, both so that we can get a specific look that we want and integrate that with the meaning that we want to convey with all these different interviews and who the people are, but then at the same time also make sure that it's easier in editing. It's easy to sort of mix and match things and match them up, and we don't have to worry about, oh, the sun set in the middle of this interview, so now it's too hard to match the end with the beginning. Another important lesson from all of my previous work, and this is really maybe more of a thing just about me than a thing about making documentaries, but it's probably true for a lot of people if you're working solo, is try to break it down into manageable tasks and small little pieces, because putting together an entire documentary, especially if you're doing it mostly as one person, it's really difficult. It's a ton of work, and if you're like me, you're trying to do everything from the pre-production to the shooting, ultimately to the editing when it comes to that and all of this stuff. And the problem is that, especially if again you're like me, so you've got a day job and other stuff going on in your life too, it can be easy to get burned out, and it can also be easy to think, okay, I just need to get through this thing, so I'm just going to keep working and try to bang all this out today while I've got some time. But the problem with that is that it's tough to sort of stay at your peak for hours and hours and hours at a time. the work that you're doing 1 hour in when you're still like fairly fresh and you're in the zone is probably going to be a lot better than the work that you're doing 6 hours in after an 8-hour workday, you know, where so now you're in hour 14 of overall work and you're probably just not doing your best work. So one thing that I really want to do with the Quadriverse, and I'm trying to set up structures for myself to make myself do this, is make sure that I'm only doing a little bit every day and that I'm doing a little bit every day so that progress is being made, but that I'm not trying to burn through large work tasks all in one go so that I can stay more fresh and be sure that I'm sort of bringing a sharper mind to everything that I'm doing. Another lesson that I learned, and this is more one that I learned on our Mount Rainier trip earlier this year, is just that while having a camera with you on the mountain is important to sort of get those close-up shots of what people are talking about and saying and things like that, at the same time to really convey an understanding of where people are on the mountain and put them in the context of the mountain and in the context of sort of nature that we're going to be out in. You really need to have set up shots. That can't be one of the climbers is always carrying the camera and just filming from there. That really only gives you a couple of possible perspectives, and you're going to need some sort of wider, further away shots where someone's going to go set up the camera. Now, for the Quad Traverse, this poses a little bit of a challenge because obviously during the Traverse itself, since I'm one of the people who's going to be doing it, and it's already going to be a very down to the wire, very difficult challenge, we're not going to have time to stop and have me run off and set up a tripod somewhere and take the shot and then stop again and have me run back and grab the camera. So what we're going to need to do is kind of try to balance that as best we can. So what I'm planning to do is, obviously we'll need to do a number of training hikes, including ones in the winter where we're covering part of, but not all of, the Quad Traverse course. So on those climbs, we will have a little bit more time. We'll have a little bit more flexibility. So those are the times when I am going to need to bring the tripod and bring a little bit more equipment, go out there, get those shots so that we can put ourselves in the context of the mountain. And that way, when we do the Traverse itself, I'll have the camera with me and I'll be in a good position to capture everything that's happening to us. But at the same time, those wider shots, those bigger shots, those sort of like, here's what it's like to be out there from the point of view of nature, not from the point of view of one of us, we should already have those, and we should be able to mix those in to really tell the story in a much more visually interesting way and have that perspective that we need. So that's another lesson for me, is that we're going to need to take the time to get those shots, to set those up, and obviously you've got to balance that with the athletic requirements of what you're trying to do. So in our case, that's going to require some editing and all of that stuff, but that's something that we need to be thinking about going into this documentary. So that's another thing. So those are probably the biggest lessons, the biggest 4 things that I've taken from previous projects that I want to bring into the Quad Traverse. Now, for those of you who want a more broad update on how the documentary is going, we finished our Kickstarter. It was successful, so thank you to everybody for that. It does take a couple of weeks for them to process the payments and then even a little more time to actually transfer the money to me. So we're kind of in limbo right now in terms of shooting, waiting for that, waiting for everybody to make sure that their payments have actually gone through and stuff like that. So we can't start shooting, especially interviews and stuff like that, until we've got lights, until we've got some of this other equipment. So we're sort of waiting around on actual production right now, but that's fine. There's plenty of pre-production work to do, and I'm already working on quite a bit of that in a number of different areas. That's something that we'll talk about in subsequent episodes, so I will leave that until then. But for now, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for backing the Kickstarter if you are one of the people who did that, and I'll see you next time.